So are we getting happier with all this internal combustion engine, this affluence? Well, here's a little study done in northern Italy. They looked at quite a few individuals and they said, look, what's your ecological footprint and how happy are you? The happiness is the black on the top, the ecological footprint is on the bottom. What can you see? It's not a very, very good sell, is it, for ecological footprint, of which is mostly wealth, because the extra wealth people accumulate tends to go on a more damaging ecological footprint. It seems to be going absolutely nowhere. So we're not getting any happier by the lifestyle we've chosen. But we do know that the natural environment can help. A lot of studies, and this is where the evidence is really strong. Here's a study done in Chicago looking at children who actually had contact with nature because of trees and grass outside where they lived, and exactly the same flats which were away in concrete. And those children who had stressful life events on the bottom, so the low is number of events like bullying, crime, abuse, problems at school, and high number of events, and you can see that there's a line that goes up, all three. The more horrible events you have in your life, the more stressed you're going to be as a child. But those of the low nature seem to go up even higher, whereas the high nature children seem to have a buffer. It seemed to hold them back. It seemed to be that the stressful events didn't have so much impact on them because something was holding it back. And that is really encouraging. It's encouraging for policy because we can actually say we can have green space and we can start altering a whole neighbourhood, a whole mindset of children coming through. We have a strategy in the UK, and I've got no apologies for going through some of these strategies because I think it's important to see how the thinking is changing, and certainly we've been pushing hard with the Department of Health. This is a 20-year strategy for mental health, and increasing availability of urban green spaces, views of access to safe green spaces, and greater engagement with the environment has been found to have multiple benefits for mental and physical health. It's in there. So we are moving, hopefully, very, very, very slowly to an understanding that the environment is going to be important. So health inequalities, that's probably our biggest worry. It's going the opposite direction, despite a Labour pledge that it would actually be reversed. If you're poor, you die early. If you're poor, you're less active. If you're poor, you're less likely to use a park. You're 7 times less likely to live in a green place, and it's associated with a social isolation, so the community. And Michael Marmot, in his report, demonstrated how being active, being a good environment and social cohesion are vital to try and reverse the attempts of health inequalities. And look at the appalling nature of this. This is the Bakerloo line. Those of you know London, it's a Jubilee line. But Bakerloo is the underground line that goes through Brent. Willesden Junction, you start there. People who live around Harlesden, their life expectancy is 71. And as you get off at Stonebridge, it's 73, Wembley Central, 76. And as you get to South Kenton, it goes up to 81 years. So just in 5 stops, you've actually had 10 years loss of life from the people around because of the social conditions. And if you look at the area of green space deficiency, more than 2 kilometres from 2 hectares of space, it's all around the bottom area where the poor people live and where they're dying early. I'm not saying that's an association, it's an association rather than causation, but certainly illustrates the problem. And a big study that came out, and it's really made a big impact, is Mitchell and Popham did a study for the whole of England, and they looked at green space and how people die, or whether they die early or not, and actually checked them out for absolutely everything else. So everything else was adjusted. No green or little green, and you can see that the incidence of death got less and less when it got to very green. Those are for the highest income. So the more green you have, the less likely you're going to die. For the moderate income, you have the same, but a slightly steeper graph. For the poorest people, yes, they die early, we've just seen that, but the green space has the biggest effect. It almost as the green space nurtures them and cradles the poor in preference to the rich. So if you want to reduce health inequalities, just put more green space. It's quite straightforward. And that's what Michael Marmot, in his review, having done the whole global health inequalities problem, he was invited by our Prime Minister to do the local, national one. And he says, we must prioritise policies and interventions that reduce both health inequalities and mitigate climate change at the same time. Improving access and quality of open and green spaces available across the social gradient was one of his recommendations. That's completely new and very, very reassuring. And in the Mayor, he, in London, had a 2-year inequality strategy, raise the awareness of health benefits of access to nature and green spaces and extend these benefits to all Londoners. So this is looking really good. But they did find in both of these reports that there were choices to be made, difficult choices. The budget for road building in the UK to 2014 from the Highways Agency is £10.2 billion. If that was spent differently, it would build 1,000 parks at an initial capital cost of about £10 million each. That would save 74,000 tonnes of carbon emitted based on 10-hectare park having 200 trees. There's a choice. £10 billion, do we build more roads or do we put parks where people are going to actually have a good, decent life? That's a choice that's going to have to be made, and it won't be just in England, it will be made, it'll be everywhere. So we've got to, the Natural Health Service, it's our way of trying to say, let's use the natural environment for health. And that Natural Health Service has got two aims, really. It's to increase the number of households within 5 minutes walk of an area of green space and to get every GP to be able to have access to health walks. A political party took it up, I can't say which one because I'll be shot being government, but it's with an election coming up, this is a hot topic, this is one of the main political parties, this is not a fringe party. And you just read that, will encourage local authorities and NHS to promote green spaces as a health resource to patients who could benefit from the exercise and spiritually stimulating experience. Did these guys come from Victoria State and come over to the UK? Because this is exactly what we're on about in this conference. This is absolutely, now whether they get into power or not, I don't think it matters. But statements like this are now coming through and are part of the political debate. So the Natural Health Service, get people out into health, into the natural environment, and get the natural environment into where they are. Both ways. You can't just build a park and expect everyone to run into it. They won't. A few rich people might do, but if it's not planned well, you won't have the impact. If you plan it really well with the local people and engage with them and understand how they're going to be able to use that park and make it adjusted for those people, you'll have a fantastic success. But you still have to market it and you still have to build it. You have to do both. So, a few things that we're doing. One of them is the NHS forest. That's to plant 1.3 million trees around hospitals and health centres in the UK. Do you know the NHS is the third largest employer in the world? It's a real monolith, but the only two other ones are the Indian Railways and the Chinese Army. And then it's the NHS, and you feel it's probably, I don't know which one I prefer to be with. We're going to talk with Paul Bramhill, who's come from Green Space, about adding a health check to the Green Flag Award for parks. We're promoting this ANC standard, that's access to natural green space. That's 300 metres for every person to have access to green space. And we're hoping to use the park after the Olympics as a standard bearer of the Natural Health Service so that people all around that community feel that they're getting their health benefits. And this is Alder Hey Children's Hospital in Liverpool, which is going to have a park going right into the hospital. I put this slide up of the world's first children's hospital park, but I think you might get there first. Because this is not going to come out until about 2015, and I think you're going to be at least a couple of years earlier. So congratulations on that. We were trying, but we haven't made it. How often do we say that about Australia? Cricket, rugby, and children's hospitals. Where the GP, we have to look at around where patients live, because as a GP, the four walls of my consulting room are not where they live for most of the time, and their health is not going to be significantly changed by me just saying a few things and popping a few pills for them. So we want to try and get that concept that the green space goes right around where the health centre is, where the practice is, and all the parks and the green space, actually that should be important for the GPs to look after and be responsible for, because that's what's going to keep their patients healthy.